You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Hello and welcome to another edition of St. Paul's Letters to America. I am your host, Ray Gerard, and this is the program that asks, what if St. Paul were actually alive today and were able to write a letter to us in America? Instead of the Romans or the Colossians or the Ephesians, what if he wrote a letter to the Americans? What would this man have to tell us, and would it in fact be helpful for us? Would we pay attention to it? Would it seem to us that it had the ring of truth to it? Would people stand up and pay any attention? Well, we're going to try to answer that question today. We're going to try to use a letter from St. Paul and see if it applies to what's going on in our country today. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the letters of St. Paul have been around for thousands of years. They've been studied. They've been honored. They've been followed for thousands of years by many people. And there's only one reason for that, really. And the reason is that they have truth in them. Things that are not truthful, that are not connected to what is true reality, that'll fade over time. It won't apply from place to place. It won't be universal, and people will stop paying attention to it. It'll become discredited. But that's not what has happened with St. Paul's letters. And, today in our country, perhaps we would do well to listen to them a little bit. So let's see if we can make a letter from St. Paul actually apply. Let's see if we can examine whether or not it would apply. And the letter we have today is just a short portion of what he actually wrote to the Romans. He said, "Don't you know that when you offer yourselves to someone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one you obey, whether you are slaves to anger, envy, pride, or to peacefulness, tolerance, and humility." That's a very short little passage that he wrote to the Romans, and it would apply to us today as well, would it not? Don't you know that when you offer yourselves as obedient slaves, you are slaves of what you choose to obey? You become slaves. It's almost as if it's total, it's absolute. If you choose something to guide your life, and whether it's good or whether it's bad, that can sort of take over. That can sort of take control. People who have addictive lifestyles know this very well. And so this is something that is true today as it was before. And the question is, do we see that in our society? We have, as a country, over our history, been regarded as a Christian nation. People have followed the Bible, quoted the Bible, taught the Bible, and, of course, the writings of St. Paul are all part of that. Well, many people feel like we're starting to get away from that. As a matter of fact, surveys and statistics show that this is becoming a more secular country. Is it for the worse? Is a passage like this something that we have chosen to perhaps ignore? Are we becoming, susceptible to the types of things that St. Paul is warning against? So let's take a look. For example, the current occupant of the White House has elicited a lot of anger from people. People don't agree with how he chooses to conduct himself. And people have gotten very bothered and animated about it. For example, you take a general like Keith Olbermann, and he recently wrote, I think this was in advance of the election, that he and his enablers and his supporters and his collaborators and the Mike Lees and the William Barrs and the Mike Pences and the Rudy Giulianis and the Kyle Rittenhouses and the Amy Coney Barretts must be prosecuted and convicted and removed from our society. It is necessary to remove and arrest the President of the United States tonight. Actually, he said that on November 5th, so just after the election. Arrest and remove the President and all these other people. Remove them from our society. Is this someone who is becoming controlled by his passions? Is this someone who's letting his animus against the President take control? He wants the President and everyone who agrees with him to be removed, or people that work with him to be removed from our society. The fact of the matter is that 60 million people voted for this man in 2016, and it looks like 60 to 70 or 70 million people voted for him in 2020. Is that somebody that is so harmful, so alien and foreign to the people of this country that he should be removed from society? Because if you're going to remove him from society and all these people who work for him, what about the 60 to 70 million people who agree with him? We remove them too? Is this not a radical idea? Is this not something where somebody is becoming controlled by his passions? If you have anger and you let it build and you let it build and you let it build, you can get to the point where you will say things like this. So if that's not the proper thing to do, how do we avoid it? How do we avoid that? Is it by remembering, for example, the writings of St. Paul, and other similar writings that we can find in the Christian Bible? Have peace. Don't let yourself be controlled by these things. We can take another example. You look at there's a gentleman by the name of Charles Murray. He's a British commentator. In the weeks before the election, he took a journalism tour across America, and he said, he noted, quote, fears of looting and arson. In the weeks and months before the election, of course, our country, after the incident, George Floyd was that the man's name in Minneapolis, or Detroit, I forget now. And he was a black man killed by police while he was in police custody. He's pleading for the ability to breathe, and nevertheless, somebody knelt on his neck until he actually died. And in the wake of that, tragedy, in the wake of that injustice, in the wake of that killing, riots erupted all across the country. And this man, Charles Murray, making this tour of the country, then said, fears of looting and arson, or only if Trump got reelected. Only if Trump got reelected. And he asked people who supported the Trump opposition, are you happy about having become the side of implicit expected violence? So and he was making the case that this was all people who are on one side of the political aisle. And so the question is, if this is political, are we not letting our passions run away with us? To make political points, we've got burnings, buildings being destroyed, businesses being ruined. You've got in many, many cities, like dozens of American cities, large and small, all of this unrest. Are we not letting passions run away with us? I mean, passion to some extent, of course, passion, emotion, it's a good thing. But when it gets to the level of violence, is there not something wrong? People are angry. People get very angry. The question is whether or not, this anger can be controlled, and shouldn't it be controlled? There was another Christian writer named St. John of the Cross, and he wrote something similar to what St. Paul wrote. And I note it because they agree with one another on this. And St. John has a little different way of expressing the same idea. And what he said is, quote, and this was in a book that he wrote called The Ascent of Mount Carmel. A lot of people refer to, his writings on this subject that's in this book about as the dark night of the soul. And what does all that mean? Well, he's talking about a deeply spiritual journey for a human in this world, this earthly existence, to try to actually achieve some state of union with God, a very, very deep, spiritual journey. But what he says is interesting. He said the soul must pass through the dark night of the senses, because all the passions it feels for created things are darkness. The passions and attachment the soul has for created things make the soul similar to these created things. Love creates likeness between one who loves and the object of its love. What he's given us here is an explanation for what St. Paul wrote about. St. Paul said, don't you know that you'll become slaves to these things that you have passions for? If you let yourself be ruled by your passions, you'll become slaves to them. And we're, people who have this political animus against one president on one particular party can, over time, get angrier and angrier and angrier and let those passions run away with them. Is that how we should act? Is that healthy? Is that good? If it's not, then it's not in line with the truth, and it should be avoided. And somebody should be saying so, and somebody should be telling us not to do this. But instead, all we hear is more and more of, no, it's okay. But St. John gives us an explanation for this. He talks about that the fact that love creates a likeness between someone who loves and what he loves. Love creates likeness. Isn't that true? If you direct your passion and you become attached to created things, you'll become like those things. If you have a passion and you let yourself become attached to one political argument, one particular political outlook, you're going to identify with that. You will become that outlook. And we see that in our country. We see that because it's to the point now where people within the same families can't talk to one another because they differ on political issues. On politics. Politics can come between people. When should anything come between people, especially within a family, people that you're supposed to love, people that on some level you do love, people that at some time or another you did love? To let politics come in the way of that? Whatever is happening on the national stage should never, and when can it ever, be justification for breaking off love within a family. Oh, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. And we've recounted stories about this on this program before, of people doing this. It's because, why is it? It's because people are in passion, their passions run away with them, and they're becoming what it is they identify with. That's who they are. I'm not a member of a family. I'm a Trump hater. And that controls how they act. So that's something that we can actually see. We can also see it on college campuses. This identity with certain political movements and political positions is taking over to the point where people can't behave civilly with one another. That's a decent question. When our passions, our political passions, rise to the level that we can't behave civilly with one another is not something Wrong. We can't just ignore the question. We can't just, take the most recent story. Like, for example, there's a case that went pretty viral. There was a guy with a MAGA hat, a student in Berkeley, and somebody struck him in the face. And I guess, wound up and struck him hard in the face. Why should anyone ever do that? Is there not something wrong? You can say people are bigoted, people are hateful. Then you can judge them. And then if they don't do what you want them to do, you strike them in the face. Something is wrong with that. And who is saying that these people are immoral? Immoral. Bad behavior. When, we live in this I'm okay, you're okay kind of society, we're afraid to criticize anybody's behavior. Now, we've often said on this program, and I think it's sound Catholic tenet, that you never judge a person. It is not right to judge a person. You don't know what goes on in their heart. You don't know what has happened in their life before the moment that you're encountering something that they're doing that you don't like. You don't know enough about them. You haven't walked in their shoes. You cannot judge, but it happens all the time. And this person who struck this kid at Berkeley judged him. And he's a hateful bigot. He's a conservative. And the judgment rises to the level, and the anger and the passion rises to such a level that he can't contain it anymore, and he must strike the person. This is what St. Paul is talking about. This is what St. John is talking about. Something is wrong. And we're loath to criticize people. We're loath to say, you can't do this. I think I'm wrong. There's an incident at State University of New York at Binghamton recently where, let's find it, but, well, let's see, we'll get to that in a second. But there's a number of these things. There's an article that was written, this was December of 2019, and it was recounting a host of things that had happened just over the previous couple of months. There's a guy, he was a president of the Chico State College Republicans. His name was Michael Curry. And he said that during the previous semester, members of his organization had been spat on, battered, assaulted, followed around, sexually harassed, and mobbed by 300 students. Passion's running away with us so that we can't even behave civilly. Do we really think this is the kind of society that we want? Because what happens when people start to fight back? Or what happens, forget when people fight back. How about if this just simply becomes more and more prevalent? And we just simply, the people that are in power, so to speak, on these college campuses, the people that think anybody who holds, an anti-same-sex opinion, or anybody who holds some kind of opinion that the LGBTQ lifestyle is not healthy or appropriate. Again, not that anybody's going to be judged, not that anybody's not going to be loved, not that anybody's not going to, is going to be discriminated against. None of that is allowable. But just to have an opinion that kind of a lifestyle is not healthy, it's not proper, it's not what God wants. Supposing you have a belief in God and you think that's not what God wants. Well, what if those people get browbeaten, physically beaten, assaulted, harassed to the point where they never say anything, and they never fight back? Let's say they never fight back, because the people that hold the majority. Let's say the people that hold this opinion against them are in the majority, and no one ever fights back because there's too many to fight back against. Let's just say that happens. That's still wrong. You're abusing other people. You take a simple family situation where let's say you take husband and wife, and there's domestic violence, and you've got a battered wife and she's abused. She never fights back. But everybody would agree there's something terribly wrong with that. You are brutalizing another human being who has the right to do that. what we're having on college campuses is another form of the same thing, because their passions are taking control of them. You can disagree with somebody. You can say, hey, if you have an anti-LGBTQ opinion, you're hateful, you're a bigot. You can have whatever opinion you want. It'd probably be wrong it would be wrong to judge a person and to hurl invectives and say unloving things about another person, something that's ungracious to another person. That's always wrong. But, I mean, at least with the legal freedoms we have in this country, you can do it. But to hit him, to physically abuse people, there's something wrong there. Let's see. Yes, this particular person got some punches thrown at him because he had exchanged contrary opinions with another guy on Facebook the night before. So this guy came and took multiple swings at him. This same guy, I'm not going to mention the names. Names aren't important. Assaulted a black man because he was conservative. So at least he's not race conscious. He'll assault anybody who's conservative. But there's another comment, but we'll pass on that. So I think that this happened. Let's see. There was an event at Sacramento State. I think this might have happened at Sacramento State. Anyways, there's a spokesman for Sacramento State University, and she said, "We are committed to providing a safe and caring environment where everyone feels secure." Really, we have safe spaces on colleges all around this country. We have rooms. My daughter was, devoted to safe spaces. My daughter was visiting a college that she eventually decided to attend, and we were taking a tour of the college, and they pointed out a room. And this is the room that you go to when you feel, violence, when you feel violence in a classroom. And the tour guide wasn't talking about actual fisticuffs breaking out. But it's like if somebody says something offensive and you perceive violence. I mean, in other words, there's a whole school of thought that is being circulated in this country that if someone says something offensive to you and it affects you, significantly in a psychological fashion, well, that's the same as physical violence, because you feel bad and maybe you can feel nervous, and maybe there might be some kind of physiological manifestations of how bad you feel. Often not, but sometimes perhaps it could rise to the level where there are physiological manifestations of it. And so they equate that with violence. Well, isn't that interesting? Because we have actual violence, and the universities aren't reacting to it at anywhere near the same anywhere near the same level. Yes, here at Binghamton University, some conservatives were hosting a table event where they had materials and pamphlets or something to promote an upcoming speaking engagement by a conservative economist, Art Laffer. No small guy, he controversial. Well, he was chief economist under the Reagan administration. He was largely given credit for formulating the policies that Reagan pursued during the 1980s, which led to a lot of economic, growth. So maybe the guy's ideas have something worthwhile. Maybe he's got something worthwhile to say, but a large group of angry students surrounded this table event where people were promoting the speaking engagement. They screamed at them, they ripped up their materials, and so forth. So they accosted these people. And afterwards, what did the university do? I mean, they took the private property of these individuals and tore it up. They tore it up, they threw it in the garbage, they screamed at these individuals, they accosted them. The university admitted that these people violated the students' code of conduct at the university. but no disciplinary action was taken against them. Disciplinary action instead was taken against the conservatives who had the table event. Why? Because apparently they didn't follow the proper procedures, they didn't get the proper permit or whatever for having their table there. So they disciplined the people who were the victims of this accosting action. Really? Is there not something wrong here? Just in terms of basic fairness. I mean, do we really want a society where this can happen? You're talking about, in essence, mob violence. And if you condone this as a university administration, you will get more of it. It's wrong. Violence against anybody is always wrong, period. And if we don't acknowledge it, we don't recognize it, there's nothing but trouble that will come for us. Who can disagree? If anybody can come up with an argument where that violence is okay based on your political opinions, I'd like to hear it. Let's see, University of Michigan, similar event. University of California, Riverside, same thing. And this is just within a couple months. Another incident, there was a female protester yelling at a conservative. She rips some materials from his hands, slaps him in the face with this sign. I guess she took a sign from the guy, ripped it up, and slapped him in the face with it and said, "Get the bleep out of my bleeping space." Really. Passions running away with people so that they can't even behave civilly with one another. Is there not something wrong with this? There was a personal event that I experienced where it was in the midst of the hearings involving Justice Kavanaugh, who sits on the Supreme Court now. And he was going through his confirmation hearings in the Senate, and it became highly controversial and very animated. Accusations were made that he had committed some sexual impropriety some 35 years ago when he was a kid in high school. A woman coming forward apparently remembered this. It had apparently not been in her memory for several decades, but apparently it got unearthed. Well, accusations based on memories that have lain dormant for decades are always, in legal sense, subject to question. Lots of things can happen in the mind. Maybe she had, there's an event and, that she experienced and it got transposed, from one person to another. If you bury it in your memory, there's a reason why you bury it. You bury it in your subconscious because maybe it's too horrible or something like of that nature. And when it comes back out later, years later, is it accurate? Are you accusing the wrong person? Did it really happen the way that you think? I mean, there's lots of issues with something like that being evidence of reliable value that you can actually send them into jail for it. I mean, it is problematic. It can be true, but you have to look at it carefully. And one of the things you look at, of course, is there anything surrounding the event that could, help, bolster or corroborate that memory? Well, this particular accuser had a best friend. Her best friend couldn't corroborate it. Best friend said she didn't remember her friend complaining about anything of this nature at the time. And there was nobody else to corroborate it. No corroboration at the time. There was a lot of evidence against it. And I had a conversation with another attorney at one point. We were standing in front of a flat screen TV in some common area of an office building. And the hearings were going on, and the discussion naturally just, came to the hearings. And, this other attorney, she had the opinion that Kavanaugh was guilty. And I was saying, well, let's look at the evidence. As trained attorneys, you're supposed to look at the evidence. How much is on one side? How much is on the other side? And of the evidence that you do have, favoring one side or the other, how probative is it? How much credibility can you give it? How are you to weigh that evidence? And so, I said, well, you've got all these witnesses on Mr. Kavanaugh's side who's saying, they never heard anything of this nature at all. You got one witness on the other side, and there are questions, and I'm not going to go into them here, but there were more factors as well that, drew into question what she was accusing Kavanaugh of. And it was a rational, analytical, mechanical, logical argument. It was a legal argument. It was the kind of argument that trained attorneys make in courtrooms every day, and the reason for that is because we require proof if you're going to put somebody into jail. We don't have kangaroo courts like we don't have show trials like in the Soviet Union of years ago, and maybe still today. I don't know. You need to have a jury of your peers. You need to have testimony of reliable witnesses. You need to have proof beyond a reasonable doubt before you're going to put somebody in jail. Arguments on that line of thinking are made in courtrooms every day. That argument bothered this other attorney. It bothered her to the point where she took her hand and placed it over my mouth as she, I don't know if she actually was yelling at me, but her voice, the loudness of her voice was pretty high. And I was surprised. She couldn't contain herself. The passion rose to such an extent that she had to get physical. Why? Why did this bother her so much that this man was going to be on the court? Was she becoming her political viewpoint? I mean, she felt it to such an extent. I mean, in her body, she had to act. It obviously bothered her so much she had to do something physically. That's getting to the point where you are becoming what you believe in terms of these political viewpoints. It's controlling her body. It's controlling her physical actions. Not just, and that's the problem. It shouldn't even control our thinking. We should be able to analytically look at something. If your thinking is governed by passion, you're not going to look at something objectively. And then you're not going to look at it correctly, or at least in a way that's more likely to lead to a correct decision. If you're guided by passions, you admit one type of argument and not another, and that's exactly what was going on. This shouldn't even govern your thinking, let alone govern your physical actions. There's something wrong here. We're being controlled by passions. We're becoming slaves to our passions. They're taking control to the point where you can't resist them. People can go through this biochemical analysis of what happens in the brain. Certain, things get released, certain chemicals get released, and then you need more and more and more of them. It can happen with anger. As it can happen with gluttony, with lust, with whatever it is that's becoming so addictive to you. That's whatever's controlling. St. Paul said you become a slave to your passions. And there was another letter where he wrote about how it happened to him. He persecuted Christians. He became so passionate, with his anger against people he disagreed with, that it controlled him. And then he changed. We see it this way. We also see it, for example, in terms of, let's just not take politics. Let's take something else. The idea is that it's never good enough to just make a judgment or an argument based on one thing. Two angles, two perspectives, two grounds for what you're saying is better than one. And of course, three is still better. And we always try to do three. So let's take a second. Let's talk about religion. Let's talk about religious intolerance. Religious intolerance. People have religious viewpoints that are different than yours. We can't tolerate it. It's happening. Atheists will say that religious people are intolerant. Most of the wars that we've had through our history, so the argument goes, that they make, most of the wars that we've had in our history, in the history of the world, are because of religion. People can't, stand somebody of a different religion, and killings, murders, tragedies, atrocities happen because of intolerant religious beliefs. Really. No doubt that there have been a lot of atrocities performed in the name of religion. A gross perversion of a lot of religious teachings, but so be it. It's happened. You can't deny that it's happened. But is it also not happening? Is it also not occurring with the people that make this very complaint? The people who are actually upset with religion because it can be intolerant are themselves becoming intolerant. Recently, another Supreme Court justice, a man named Samuel Alito, gave a Zoom presentation, in which he was talking about some recent trends in religious liberty in this country. Now, religious liberty in this country should not be open to question. We have an amendment in the Bill of Rights, part of our very Constitution, one of the most sacrosanct principles of this country and its founding and its existence ever since its founding is religious liberty, the ability to worship as you wish. People fled Britain because they couldn't do that. Freedom of expression, freedom of religion, these are some of the most basic principles of what we have always regarded as a free society. It's the reason why people from all of the countries have, collected all the money they have, all their life savings, and have used it to travel thousands of miles by boat, etc., to come and immigrate to this country, because it is free. It has been free in ways that other countries have not. Some of our most sacrosanct rights, some of the most appealing rights of this country. Religious freedom is, if it's not the most, if it's not the number one, right of that nature, it's certainly as high as any other. And he said that the pandemic has resulted in previously unimaginable restrictions on individual liberty. And we can certainly see that. And on religious liberty. We've got churches ordered closed all around the country in discriminatory fashion. When Walmarts and nail salons and liquor stores and all kinds of other businesses are allowed to be open, churches are ordered closed. Why? Is it religious intolerance? Supreme Court just recently issued a ruling where the governor of New York's restrictions on churches was tossed as unconstitutional because it was discriminatory. If churches practice social distancing, if churches insist on masks, and they do that, why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't they be allowed to be open if other businesses are allowed to be open? What is different about people gathering in a space where, the building is devoted to a religious purpose, as opposed to a building where, it's devoted to, selling bottles of liquor? Are people, somehow do people become physically changed? Do the laws of physics change inside a church as opposed to the laws of physics that apply inside a liquor store? It doesn't make sense. There is only one explanation for it. Don't like churches. There's another word for that. intolerance. Mr. Alito said, we've never before seen such restrictions as severe, extensive, and as prolonged. Closure of churches on Easter Sunday, closure of synagogues during Jewish holidays, Passover, etc. But then he said something else. He said that this has highlighted disturbing trends that were already present before the virus struck. He's been on the bench for cases dealing with Hobby Lobby and the Little Sisters of the Poor. And he's saying that these cases that came before the pandemic are part of a trend. Religion must conform. The Little Sisters of the Poor must conform to the mandates of Obamacare, regardless of the fact that no employee ever actually was harmed by the Little Sisters or raised a complaint against the Little Sisters because they wanted, abortion drugs or something like that, contraceptives or the abortion pill or whatever, and they were denied it. Forget the fact that no one was actually harmed, that no employee ever came forward alleging that kind of a problem with the Little Sisters organization. The fact is that the government in California and other places have said, I think it was the federal government, I think Colorado as well, they've come out and they've said, well, no, you have to agree to do this. It's the government coming down on them. You can't have a religious exception. You can't say, no, I'm not going to do this because it's against my religious beliefs. The constitutional right to freedom of religion stops here. The government is coming in and saying this. Why? Why do they have to in this case? Why not just let them slide? If no one's complaining, if no employee is actually bringing forth a grievance, what's so wrong about it? Same thing with adoption agencies, Catholic adoption agencies that don't believe in placing children with same-sex parents, where there are other, this case in Philadelphia, where there are other adoption agencies that if a Catholic agency was presented with a situation where there was a same-sex couple that wanted to be an adoptive couple, the Catholic agency would refer them to another agency. But no, we can't allow it. The Catholic agency must change their religious beliefs, even if people are not being harmed. Why? There's a word for it. It's intolerance. And this is what Justice Alito was referring to. He says that for many today, quote, for many today, religious liberty is not a cherished freedom. It's often just an excuse for bigotry, and it can't be tolerated, even when there is no evidence that anybody has been harmed. Here's another example. For example, houses of worship were limited to a capacity of 50 people, while casinos in Nevada were allowed a much higher number. They could go at 50% capacity. So you can gamble. Casinos become more important than churches. There's a recent case, a situation, a recent story I heard about where there's a church out in California. Strip clubs were allowed to be open. Strip clubs allowed to be open, but not churches. So the pastor played some striptease music and removed his tie, classified his church as a strip club, and said, we're going to be open for service. Does this make sense? There is only one explanation for this. You can have gambling, you can have strip clubs, you can have liquor stores, you can have marijuana stores, you can't have churches. Is this not intolerant? And why is it? Alito went on. There's the famous Bergfeld decision, which said that same-sex couples could legally marry. It made same-sex marriage legal for the entire country. The 9 justices on the Supreme Court, by a majority decision, decided that they were going to take away from state legislatures the power to decide what is a marriage in all 50 states. And he dissented in that opinion. And he quoted from that dissent. And it said, and in that dissent he said, quote, "I assume that those who cling to old beliefs will be able to whisper their thoughts in the recesses of their homes. But if they repeat those in public, they will risk being labeled as bigots and treated as such by governments, employers, and schools." And he says this is just what is coming to pass. And you see it on the college campuses. People have conservative views. They cling to old notions of things, and they get accosted. If they dare express these old views in public, they become subjected to intolerance. Why is that happening? Why is it happening? Is it not because our passions are running away with us? Why can't you let the Little Sisters or the Catholic Adoption Agency in Philadelphia do what they do if other people aren't being harmed? Why can't you let churches stay open if you let casinos and strip clubs stay open? Why? Is it because we have viewpoints against people with religious beliefs that we don't agree with, and they control us to such extent that we can't tolerate them? We can't abide by them. That's letting your passions take control. That's becoming what you're passionate about. That's where, you become like the thing you covet. You desire a different religious viewpoint. You covet a different religious viewpoint, and it controls you to the point where you can't tolerate somebody who doesn't have the same viewpoint. That's not being kind. That's not allowing other people to have basic freedoms. That's abusing other people. There is something wrong with that. Similarly, there's a guy who came forward talking about Pinterest censoring Bible verses, Bible quotes. They'd censor them. Why? Why can't you let other people express their views on a social media platform? Why do you have to step in and stop them from doing that? Why do you have to stop them from using their freedom of expression? Maybe there's other people that agree with them. You have to step in because you decide it's wrong. That's intolerant. Third example. The corona situation. So we have college campuses being closed all over the country, lockdowns of various sorts, and it's occurring on college campuses. Well, who's looking at the data? One guy his name is Andrew Bostom, professor, a doctor, I believe. But he took it upon himself to start compiling data from 50 U.S. universities, a lot of major universities, famous universities, University of Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, Ohio State, Iowa, Kansas, Penn State, Wisconsin, Notre Dame, Texas, Illinois, et cetera, et cetera. And as of October 5th, since the pandemic started, he found that these universities have reported just under 70,000 cases of COVID-19. 70,000 cases of COVID-19. Well, that would certainly seem like it's good reason to close the universities. How about some other data? Those same universities in their reports indicated 3 hospitalizations. 70,000 positive tests, 3 hospitalizations. So a lot of other people must have got sick. Obviously they recovered. They didn't require hospital care. 3 required hospital care. Out of those 3 that required hospital care, how many didn't make it out of the hospital? All of them did. There were no deaths. No deaths. So the question, why close universities? Why close them? Why close them? 3 hospitalizations. 70,000 cases, 3 hospitalizations. It's been reported that people under 20 years of age have nearly basically 100% chance of beating this virus. Overall, the statistics are like a 99.6% survivability rate to the coronavirus. 99.6. Average age of someone who dies from the coronavirus, 82 years. That's the normal lifespan currently for people anyway. There's the positive test. There's a report that came out on the positive test. There's something called the Pcr test, which is apparently the most common form of test for the coronavirus, regarded by some of the so-called gold standard. And what does it do? It amplifies certain viral genetic material to the point where it can be measured. And the number of amplifications that are taking place in any given test is important. And basically magnified. They take some, the test will, in order to get a positive test result, you take some amount of this viral material that's in a sample, and you have to amplify it. You magnify it over and over and over again, and then you can measure it. Well, the number of amplifications is important. And Dr. Anthony Fauci has said that once you get above 35, every time these amplifications are called like a cycle, and every time you give above 35 cycles, he said, it's really not very useful. He said that if, for example, a sample has a threshold of 37 or 38, it's just dead nucleotides. So in other words, you'll find the viral material, but it's dead. It can't infect you. It's been killed off by your immune system already. Well, across the country, according to the New York Times, most tests set the limit at 40. Okay. Well, all right. So there's a chance that some of the tests are obviously going to be false positives. Okay. So where should, the threshold for these amplifications, these cycles be? Well, researchers have said something more reasonable would be 30 to 35, which makes sense. If, 30, according to Fauci, 37, 36, 37, you're talking about dead nucleotides. Anyways, if you reduce it down to 30 to 35, that means that your chances, the changes in the genetic material that you would have to have in a sample in order to get a positive test result would have to increase 100-fold to 1,000-fold. So every time you go from 35 to 34 to 33, etc., you're not talking about just a small change. I mean, it progresses in sort of geometric fashion. 3 sets of testing data processed in New York, Massachusetts, and Nevada showed that 90% of the people testing positive had barely any virus. Pennsylvania, California, and other places, they say that most of the countries in the state, they don't get, almost all the states in this nation don't get information, don't get data from the labs on what the threshold is, what the tests are measuring. Is it at 40? Is it at 30? They don't get that data. They don't track that data. That would be important. Dr. Michael Mina, Harvard epidemiologist, told the New York Times that to forgo the recognition of this quantitative issue is irresponsible. But, we hear in the news reports over and over and over again about the tests. How many people tested positive? How many people tested positive? How many people tested positive? And we're going through stringent lockdowns and putting nations through all kinds of gyrations based on the number of tests, number of cases. But they're not keeping track of this quantitative data. And we're locking down universities, with the numbers that I gave you before, saying that there's not much point in it. Why is that happening? Why is our fear of the coronavirus, taking such hold of us? Why is this emotion, this passion of fear, taking such control of us? We are in a situation where we allow our emotions and our passions to govern over solid analysis, to govern over critical objective analysis, to govern over civil behavior, to govern over tolerance of people with different religious views. We are becoming a society that allows passions to go unchecked. We don't have anybody telling us, no, control yourself. We don't have anybody quoting St. Paul, at least outside of Sunday church services. We don't have people reminding us of what St. Paul was telling us. And this is a problem. Passions can take control, and we can become slaves to them, and then we become like them. We become, like what we love, and then we cease being free to do what we should be doing, to do what we would otherwise do, because we're letting ourselves be controlled. Well, we hope this has been interesting. I hope it's helped you look at something from a different angle than perhaps otherwise you might have. And we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you'll come back. So until the next time, we wish you God's best blessings. Thank you.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up where knowledge takes flight.